There's a lot of cards in this game that you see people play in Commander that are everywhere. Everyone's playing them and you have to put them in your deck if you're in that color. Right? Well, that's what this video is for. Good evening, darlings and deviants. My name is Lucy and I'm just a little loony. New people are discovering how great this game is every day, and that's fantastic. But there's over 20,000 cards in this game with all sorts of art and fancy effects, and it's hard to know which cards are great, and in some cases, why you see them all over the place. And who better to tell you why than someone with Loony in their name? Wait, don't answer that. Today, we're going to take a look at 10 white staples. I'm going to explain why they're good and why you see them all the time. These aren't ranked in any particular order, and these aren't the only white staples. These are just the ones that I want to talk about. If you want me to talk more about these and the staples of other colors, let me know down in the comments below. Without further ado, let's start the show. First up is Wrath of God. For 2 and 2 white, this is a sorcery that destroys all creatures. They can't be regenerated. It's a super simple card, and honestly, most of the white cards that are staples are, so there's probably a joke there somewhere. Wrath of God and its myriad of copycats is a staple because it's the titular wrath from which all others are named. Turns out when a big dude in the sky gets upset and throws the sun at people, it's hard to hang around the battlefield, who'da thunk? So destroying all the creatures on the board is good, but why run Wrath of God specifically instead of any of its other copycats like I was talking about? Well, notably, the more expensive the Wrath effect gets means you can't follow up said Wrath effect by developing your own board. If you have to pay more upfront to wipe the board, you won't really be able to put up your own defense if your opponents have more ready to throw at you. So, next time your opponents put up a board of 10,000 tokens and at least 17 different dragons with unpronounceable names, be sure to show them your Wrath. As a bit of a counterpoint to the last pick, Flawless Maneuver is up next. This is 2 and a white for an instant that gives all of your creatures indestructible. While that's pretty okay on its own, it gets even better because if you have your commander, the spell's free. That's right, 0 mana and you get to just say no to any sort of destruction. Denounce that Doomblade, be gone, blasphemous act, you farewell. Well, okay, that one still works. This one is a part of a cycle of free spells in Commander, and honestly, you'll probably see most of them pop up on these lists. And hey, if you want to see those lists when I make them, you should do the flawless maneuver of subscribing to the channel. It helps me out a ton and keeps this show on the road. Next up is Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile. These are both 1 mana instants that exile a creature, but give the controller of the creature a little something on the way out. Swords gives them life, and Path gives them a land. Honestly, between the two of them, Swords is a bit better because life is way less valuable than a land. But white also has plenty of cards that help you catch up if an opponent outpaces you in lands, so if you're running those, Path is basically free. These are staples because 1 mana answers to problematic creatures is necessary in this day and age of big beefy cards with entire libraries of text. 1 mana to say, nope, not reading that today, is more than worth any cost you're willing to give them. Speaking of catch-up cards, we have Knight of the White Orchid. This card is 2 white mana for a 2/2 human knight with first strike, and when it enters the battlefield, if an opponent has more lands than you, you can go get a plains card from your deck and put it onto the battlefield. Note that is a plains card, so if you're using this in a multicolored deck, you can go get dual lands. Even disregarding the Path of Exile upsides I was talking about, this card makes it so you never really feel terrible about not going first. It's not only ramp, remember you can play this, then your land for the turn, but it's also a way to help equalize against being unlucky whether you missed a land drop early or you just didn't win the die roll. White's gotta keep things fair after all. Well, fair for you, not so much for your opponents. On the topic of creatures and keeping things fair for you and not your opponents, next up is Grand Abolisher. For 2 white, you get a 2/2 human cleric that says, during your turn, your opponents can't cast spells or activate abilities of artifacts, creatures, or enchantments. While this creature is very vulnerable if you don't kill your opponents the turn it comes into play, it's still extremely powerful. Being able to stop any interaction with your board for an easy investment of 2 mana is just backbreaking sometimes. And if you get fit a pair of boots, you can be a real monster during each of your turns. Magic the Gathering makes me say some weird sentences sometimes. Next up is Darksteel Mutation. For 1 and a white, you get an enchantment aura that turns a creature into a 0/1 insect artifact creature with indestructible. It then loses all other types and abilities. This is a staple for any white deck that prefers enchantments over instant and sorcery removal, and is fantastic at stopping troublesome creatures. But be careful, if you play this against a deck that can put counters on creatures, they now have a massive indestructible bug that you targeted. Bugs can be scary. Continuing the trend of me mentioning cards that are then immediately answered by the next card, we have Generous Gift and Stroke of Midnight. They're both 2 and a white for an instant that gets rid of a permanent and gives your opponent a replacement. Gift destroys any permanent, but gives a beefier 3/3 elephant, whereas Stroke can only hit non-land permanents, but you give them a 1/1 instead. It really depends on how much removal you need and what you're really scared about for which one of these to pack into your deck. Personally, I prefer the flexibility of Generous Gift, but honestly you could probably run both and be fine. People like gifts after all. Finally, the top dog of all the white staples, we have Smothering Tithe. For 3 and a white we get... hold on, get the right art on the screen right now. There we go, Pretty Woman Supremacy. For 3 and a white you get an enchantment that says every time your opponent draws a card, they may pay 2 generic mana. If they don't, you get a treasure token. This card is simply phenomenal in any deck. For one, white is one of the colors that has the most difficult time ramping, and some would argue it has the hardest time. While there are cards that can help us catch up on lands like Knight of the White Orchid, we're mostly leaning on artifacts to do the heavy lifting, and this card gives us tons of them. And on the surface, this card seems fair. After all, how many times do people really draw cards? A lot. They draw cards a lot. And unlike other effects that really only need you to pay 1 mana, this one costs 2, and almost no one will be able to pay for this effect all the time. It's honestly one of the most accurate card names I've ever seen. It really is smothering. These cards are some of the most powerful spells in Commander, but these aren't the only ones. If I missed one you think is better, let me know down in the comments below. If my lovely audience likes these kind of videos, then I'll definitely make some more. As always, thank you all so very much for watching, and until next time, au revoir! Well, I reckon I better get back to work. Ain't like this bounty's gonna hunt itself after all.